to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us as we come to you from Washington, D.C., from looking at around the globe in 143 different nations, looking at the ways that we can address severe climate change to bring about alternative power systems, and many of the issues to bring about a better quality of life for fully some 3 billion people, those that are bottom of the pyramid that we constantly hear about. And many of them are in the 105 nations that are faced with malaria, many of the other ravages of diseases that have been around, known for the last 400 or 500 years, and yet very little has been done about it. At the same time, when you have the stress of internal displacement, meaning people do not have the fuel and the fiber they need to stay in one place in the countryside, they move into the cities. They move to the coastal areas where there's more water. So you have this constant movement of people through around the globe. And so what can we do to address some of this? We've been talking about the issues and the challenges have been made. So now we need to look at what are some of the solutions. We have Sandra Cointreau, who is a civilian and environmental engineer. She's actually coming to us by Skype out of Connecticut, so we're going to have her on. We have her slides and presentation actually in the studio. Sandra, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And,
nice to be here.
And we have to say, based on everything that we know about Sandra, she is the best of the best around the whole world. And we're really pleased to have you. And I have to say that she was a global advisor in waste management and a number of other issues at the World Bank. She's retired from there, has her own organization. And Sandra, we're really pleased to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we have Jim still in the studio with us, so if you happen to drop off up there, we have your slides. He went through them with us, and so we're going to keep on going. But thank you for being with us. But looking at the global context, I have your slide up here. We're going to go ahead and bring that up and ease out from Sandra so we can bring up the first slide. And let's talk about the global context. What is that, Sandra? And let's set the stage for our viewers around the globe.
Yeah, this first slide just gives some idea of how many people in the world and how many of our livestock in the world are living in developing countries. So about 80% of the world's people are in developing countries, and about 40% of the livestock being raised to feed the people of the world are now in developing countries. And in fact, China right now is the largest producer of poultry and meat and fish in the world. And so we're seeing a big shift of livestock production going to developing countries. The other thing that, of course, people are now mentioning quite often is that in the past 2 years, over 50% of the world's population has now been proven to be living in cities.
Yeah, I think the World Bank has it now. It's about 54%. And of course, as you know, with this continued internal displacement of citizens looking for a better quality of life, that numbers continue to increase. And I think our colleague Jim sitting with us here is saying that within the next 20 years, it may be as many as 60% of the world's population be in urban areas.
People are looking for jobs, and they're looking for education for their children and opportunities for their families. So, you know, we can expect that trend to continue.
Well, looking at this next one as the municipal solid waste generation, we know that comes with more people in urban areas. Also, as many of your populations become more affluent, over the last 30 years, I've been involved with Japan and then Korea and now Vietnam and China. The amount and actually what they call the quality of the waste continues to increase. Tell us a little bit about that and what does that mean, Sandra?
Well, there's a perception that only the high-income countries are producing a lot of waste. And what this diagram shows
let's bring back this chart because I think it's important.
In the high-income countries, we have about 1 billion of the world's population, whereas about 5.4 billion are in the developing countries. So the solid waste in the high-income countries is less than half the amount in the developing countries. even though the rate per person is lower in developing countries, the total quantity of waste being generated there is much higher.
Now, we're looking at this whole thing as far as the generation of waste too, as I experienced in Asia, because we were working on dealing with municipal solid waste over the last 30 years, is that you had much higher incidence of plastic, woods, and wrapping and other kinds of solid waste versus it was mostly animal and vegetable waste the first years that I was in Japan back in the 70s. So this whole idea of manufactured goods is actually increasing to the level of the waste. Even in the developing world, it's increasing.
Yes. Yes, the amount of waste per person dramatically increases as the economic level of the country and the individuals in it increases, because when people have more money, they of course buy more things, there's more packaging, and they have more consumer goods, so there's much more waste.
Well, and then the whole thing too of the prepared foods in many of these areas, such I was recently in the Congo and southern Africa, is that many people are going out and getting packaged foods because they absolutely do not have food in their own home areas they can depend on, so they have to have packaged foods. And I think this is a new phenomena that you've been reporting on in your research and your writings.
That's right. And now that it's a global economy, people are buying from all over the world. And of course, when they buy it from away from their local area, it has to come with a lot more packaging in order to be transported.
Well, I think this one number that you have here in this slide, and then we'll go to the next set, but as far as the low-income populations, this 2.4 billion persons you're talking about, is that, they really are, even though they're in slums, they're still generating more and more solid waste, which is indicative of where we're going in the 21st century. And that adds extra strain to them because, where is the solid waste going to go? Because there's no real way to dispose of and deal with it in a very realistic manner.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And as they begin to industrialize, then they add to that the fact that they will have industrial waste with a number of hazardous components.
Well, looking at the local financing, and I love the way that you've laid this out, Sandra, because it's a very nice logical flow of the problems we're having. And when you think of finance, you think again more of the affluent, the higher end countries, but finance is critically important if there's going to be any development and a better way of life or a way out of the slums that we have for these developing countries. Touch on the finances, and let's bring this slide up for Sandra so that we can share this with our viewers.
This slide is really important to me because so often people think, well, those people in developing countries are poorer, so therefore they have their costs for service are not very high. They assume that there's a direct relationship between having a lower income and also having a lower cost of service. And first of all, that is really not true. In a global economy where many of these countries don't have fuel, for example, they'll have to import fuel, and they might be paying more for fuel than countries that are much bigger and much richer and may even have fuel.
Well, let me interject something.
They don't have a lot of purchasing power to get a good price. So they may pay more for that. They also have to import their equipment, their trucks and their bulldozers and all their equipment. So they may wind up paying more for a bulldozer or a refuse truck in an African country than we would have to pay for it here in the United States, or Europeans would pay for it, because we're making them locally, and they don't have to be transported, and there are no customs duties and all of that. So one of the issues is not only that their costs are not necessarily lower, but then on top of that, they have so much less money per person. Here in high-income countries like Europe and Japan and the United States, we average, anywhere from $35,000 to $40,000 per capita per year.
And let's bring this slide back up so we can reinforce what Sandra is saying.
Yeah,
right now.
gross national product. And a large percentage of the money that we have in gross national product as our income goes to our taxes. So government has a fair amount of money to be able to spend on infrastructure and services. You know, on average, at least $6,000 per person per year is available to government to provide service. Whereas if you look down at what the incomes are in developing countries, it's anywhere from $600 per person per year in a poor country, and in the middle income country, maybe around $3,000. And you'll see that the percentages of what is collected in revenues and taxes by government is lower. And in the poorest countries, they're averaging more like 10 or 11% of tax income. So they might only have about $64 per person per year to be able to spend on services.
Well, the whole thing about that, Sandra, is that goes, and we'll talk about this in segment 4 about infrastructure. There's really very little money to provide the infrastructure, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, and other things that are needed.
Very little money.
But your point was really well made and taken. It's just the example of Uganda and many countries in the central part of Africa, where here we're paying about $3 a gallon for diesel fuel. Over there, the diesel fuel is much lower quality, but yet it's almost to $7 a gallon.
Exactly.
And so when you're trying to deliver goods and services to poor regions and you're paying $7 a gallon, guess what? Many of those services actually just don't go to those areas, and the government officials just don't have a way to get out there. So we have only about a minute left, Sandra, and you're coming to us from Connecticut. And I'm going to put up, let's see, let's look at this last slide here. But just tell us, with the viewers, what would you like to share in these last 30 seconds for our viewers here and around the globe?
You'll see that in the high-income countries, we're basically collecting all of the waste. We're recycling or recovering resources from about half of it, including waste energy. And we're landfilling about half of it. But when you go to developing countries, collection levels are very low, ranging anywhere from like 40 to 60% of the total waste is collected, and the level of safe disposal is very low. Some countries have
Sandra, we have only about 10 seconds left, and
so very low levels of safe disposal, less than 30%
Thank you for
in
being
most
with
Latin
us
American
as we
countries,
create
less
the
than
Emerald
5%
Planet.
in Africa.